We'll be starting up again with our morning webinar here in about a minute. And if you open up your chat pod, you'll be able to get a copy of the budgeting workshop manual, which we'll be using in this webinar and another webinar later this summer. And you can get a copy of the slides also by opening up the chat pod. Are you all set, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay. As soon as my clock turns over, we'll start up.
Okay.
So it's 9 o'clock. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of our summer series of Topical Tuesday webinars. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Local Roads program. And we're starting off with fleet management. We know everybody has fleets, and we thought it was a good place to get started with some of our summer activities. We're trying these out to see how folks like the attendance, like coming to short webinars in the summer. Trying to see what we're going to do as we come out of COVID. So let us know your thoughts and ideas. Whatever we can do to help you is our primary goal. Today's speaker is Tim Hunt. He is the current Highway Superintendent in Lewis County, and prior to that, he was in Casanova for how many years, Tim?
12 years.
12 years, and then you helped out Georgetown for about a year.
Yep, had a small town in between. Yep.
So the nice thing is here, he's seen everything from a very small town to a county to actually a pretty good sized town. How many miles of road do you have in Casanova?
We were responsible for 60 centerline miles and then did another 28 for the county in the winter.
In the winter. And then how many miles do you have up in Lewis?
250.
And then of course you add on top of that, how many bridges?
90.
And
90.
bridges you didn't have to deal with before, just big culverts. So
exactly.
It changes the game. So it's good to have that perspective. Again, for those who are interested, you can download the manual for our budgeting workshop and today's slides by opening up the chat pod. That chat pod will not be available for you to put information in. To do that, you need to open up the Q&A pod. Both are available at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring that. And Tim, do you want questions as we go, or do you want us to hold them until the end?
Yeah, I'd like them as we go. I see a few familiar names out there. Sean Hansen, good morning. I also see Peter Compton, good morning. So some veterans here as well.
Howard and John. And yeah, I know most of these names.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Good.
So great. Throw your questions at me as we go. I'm going to try to do a balance between practical, real world stuff, and we're going to throw some scary formulas and math at you. So I'll try to walk through both.
He'll give you a link to the spreadsheet before the end of the day, so don't feel bad about remembering the formulas.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'm going to go dark and silent, but I'll step in if you need me to, Tim.
Great. Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
No, thank Amanda and Adam behind the scenes. They're the ones really doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. So, well, great. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about fleet management, and I'm going to try to introduce you to a little bit different concept than most of us are used to. And what I want to do is I want to talk about life cycle costing, because what we generally focus on, and a lot of it has to do with the practical realities of our job, right? We need a plow truck. We go to our town board and they say you can have this much money. So what we end up doing is focusing on what does it cost us to buy that piece of equipment. And what I would suggest is that what's more important is to focus on what does it cost us to own that piece of equipment, which is life cycle costing. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity to have a conversation about when is the appropriate time to replace that piece of equipment, and how do we operate our equipment at the very lowest possible cost over its lifetime for our communities. So it looks like a scary formula, but it's actually very simple. It's NPV, which stands for net present value, and NPV equals your capital cost, what you paid for a plow truck, plus any repair costs that you've done to it, divided by how many years you've owned it. It's really a fairly simple formula, but this is the formula that you would see in a finance class. NPV, net present value of the piece of equipment, is capital cost plus repair cost divided by lifespan. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to get back into the practical of why. So first of all, when you're setting up a fleet management program, you want to lay the groundwork so that you have the right data to have a conversation with, because you're trying to communicate to your board about the need for these pieces of equipment, and sometimes they're not going to see that value. So you've got to be able to have the data to show it to them. So to lay that groundwork for each piece of equipment that you have, you need to keep good records of all repairs associated with that piece of equipment. And you want to keep the replacement value of that piece of equipment updated annually when you do your inventory. And as a result, you can calculate or do an annual report on the cost of operation of that vehicle. And I'm going to kind of show you a little example of that here in just a second. Operating costs should decrease every year, but there's going to be a point where they start to increase. And that's when you should start to think about replacing that piece of equipment. So I'm going to show you an actual example. So we said net present value is capital cost plus repair cost divided by how many years you've owned it. So in NPV 1 here, we have a $250,000 plow truck. We've owned it 1 year, which means it cost us $250,000 to operate it in year 1 of ownership of that plow truck. In year 2, let's assume we did $1,000 worth of repair costs. So $250,000 plus $1,000 divided by 2 means it's cost us $125,500 per year to operate that truck for 2 years. So I put together a little chart to kind of show you what happens if you do that. Year 1, $250,000. We had no repair costs. It cost us $250,000. In year 2, that $250,000 plow truck plus $1,000 repair cost equals $125,000. In year 3, we have $250,000 plow truck, the $1,000 from the year prior, and then this year we spent $2,000 on repairs, so we had a total of $3,000, and then we divided by 3, and that gave us $84,000 a year. And you'll see that it starts to decrease every single year. Now, the maintenance costs in year 7, I put 35,000 and I put 40,000, and that might be a little aggressive, but I wanted to show you what happens as you start to add up all of the previous year's repair costs and you start to divide. It gets lower and lower, and then you get to a tipping point where now your annual cost of ownership starts to go back up. And in this example, that's on year 9, because you can see it went from 45, 43, 43.1, and now it's going back the other direction. So the question is, why does that happen? And I want to kind of show you what happens. And we're all aware of this, right? We have a piece of equipment. We paid $250,000 for this plow truck, and it depreciates over a period of time until it has no value left. Also, in year 1, it doesn't cost us any repairs, but at some point, the repair costs start going up and up and up. And when your depreciation curve and your repairs cross, that trowel right there is exactly the lowest point of ownership of that vehicle. And that is when it's optimal to sell that piece of equipment. And it's a fairly simple calculation to be able to do that and show that to your board. Take your purchase price plus all your repair costs and do an annual cost of ownership. So it's a fairly simple thing. So let's talk about one other component to that, right? So NPV is our life cycle cost, which is our capital cost, plus our repair cost divided by lifespan, which we just went through. And we just talked a little bit about how repair costs start to impact that. But the other one is capital cost. And capital cost is not just the purchase price of that piece of equipment. It's the purchase price minus what you sold it for. And what most people do is they buy it and they hold it for a long period of time and they sell it for scrap value. So we take a $250,000 plow truck, 20 years later, we send it to the scrapyard for $8,000, and our total capital cost was $242,000. Or we could take that $250,000 plow truck and sell it at a shorter place when it still has life in it. And so we sell it for 125,000. Now our capital cost is less. So it's 125,000. So that's the other piece in that equation that we want to be aware of. And the question is, when is the right time to sell a plow truck or any piece of equipment, quite frankly? And here's what we know. It's cheaper to own them in the first half of their life than it is the second half of their life, because the second half of their life is when we're doing all the repairs on it. So if you can purchase it, own it for that first half when the repairs are low and it still has higher residual value, it's actually cheaper to own that vehicle in that period of time. So let's kind of walk through what our goals would be in setting up an equipment program. We want to minimize our equipment cost of ownership, not purchase price, but cost of ownership. So we want to focus on life cycle cost. We want to maximize our resale value, and we want to minimize our repair costs. That's our goal, right? And that's what we all want to do. The hard part is, how do we convince our legislators or the people making the decisions that we're managing this and we're doing it at the right time and that we have the right amount of money to do it? And quite frankly, most legislative boards, and I can say this because I was on the town board for many years in the town of Cazenovia, have no idea the true cost of operating the equipment in the highway department. If I told you right now that it costs you $20,000 per year per truck in your shop, no matter how you slice it, you have to have $20,000 a year to operate a piece of a truck, most board members would go, oh, wow, we don't have that much budgeted. And they don't, because they don't understand the cost of operating this equipment. So you guys are left in this void of, we need this much, but we only have this much. And the only way you're going to get through that is to communicate accurate information to your board about what these true costs really are. So that's our goal, is how do we start to do this and how do we have those conversations? So let's look a little bit about maximizing our asset value. We know that I'm using a plow truck throughout this example because it's the most common piece and it's one of the most important ones that we have. But a plow truck now, I just ordered one. It was $270,000. And at some point in its lifespan, that truck is going to be worth scrap value. The question is, what does that depreciation curve look like? Is it a straight line? Is it a curve? And this is actually plotted out pretty accurately. Somewhere around year 16, 17, we're down to scrap value. The reality is that this curve changes all the time. And it's changed fairly dramatically in the highway world in the last 20 years. Some of you can remember, going into a highway department, when I started in our town, they had 20, 30, 35-year-old trucks, and they paid very little for them, and they lasted a long time. We didn't use very much salt, so they didn't rust out. They were fairly easy to work on. The guys could work on them themselves, and they kept them running. So they paid maybe $80,000 for that truck, and it might have lasted 25 years. So it was a fairly flat curve. Well, what's happened is this curve has gotten much steeper in the last 10 or 15 years, because in 2008 was the first round of emissions. And we know that emissions have made trucks more expensive. They've made trucks more complicated. There's a lot more electronics on these trucks. And the days of having a 30, 35-year-old plow truck are gone because of those electronics. So what we're seeing is this curve is starting to get steeper. And that's something you want to be aware of. And it changes, it constantly changes. But that's one of the things that's happening. On the other side of that is the repairs on these trucks. This curve has also gotten much steeper. because we all know that, you probably didn't do much work on the truck for the first 5, 6, 7 years. And then it still wasn't very significant. You might replace a box, 10 or 15 years later, you put a new box on it, or, you'd have some repairs, but it wasn't significant. Well, now, as these things have gotten more electronic, you replace a one box that fails on the emission system, and it's $15,000 to $20,000. So what we're seeing is this curve is getting steeper as well. So both of those things colliding are making it very important to understand when this is happening right here. And what we think is that this chart right here is a pretty accurate representation of your average plow truck. Somewhere between years 5 and 7, that truck is probably going to have its highest resale value and its lowest repair cost. And those curves are going to start to cross, and your daily operating costs are going to start to go up. So and you can plot this for every piece of equipment just using that simple formula that I showed you. So I want to kind of walk you through an actual example that I had in the town of Cazenovia and show you a little bit about how it works and some theories and thoughts behind it. And hopefully it poses some questions that you guys can throw into the chat pod. So in 2006, way back when, I was a highway superintendent in the town of Cazenovia, and we bought a brand new plow truck. That plow truck, we paid $164,599. Now, interestingly enough, that truck has just about doubled in value today. So to replace that truck is almost $300,000 today. But that's what it was in 2006, $164,000. And 7 years later, in 2013, we sold that plow truck for $109,000. That gave us a capital cost of $55,599. Now, I just want you to think about what would happen if we had kept that truck for 20 years. So our capital cost of $55,599 divided by 7 years gives us an annual cost of ownership of capital of $7,943. Now, if we took that same truck for 20 years and you took $164,599 divided by 20, it actually cost you $8,230 a year. So the capital cost was actually higher by owning it for 20 years than it was by 7. And it has to do with the residual value of selling that truck. So that when we sold that truck for $109,000, we actually had a residual value that brought down our capital costs. So just an important concept that we don't think about. I mean, if you said to most people, is it cheaper to keep a truck for 7 years or 20 years? They tell you 20 years for sure. But you can see right here, the math, that residual value is an important part of that.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
This is a great calculation. And if folks are interested, in the chat pod, I'm throwing up a spreadsheet that we did that will let them do this calculation. It's a little different than yours. We use it in our running your highway department class. And it has the ability, if need be, to even put in inflation, because all the things you're doing don't include the inflation, except for a couple of things you'll talk about near the end. Hasn't been an issue in a few years, but it's something people may want to think about. But it does allow you to put in the salvage value and see what the effects are.
Sure. And you're right, David. I didn't put in inflation because I was trying to keep the calculations as simple as possible.
We actually recommend to do it without the inflation numbers to start with anyway. You only add those in later, because a lot of times the numbers don't really change as much as people think. So.
And when I get to the end, I will have a little conversation, because the things are starting to change. Inflation may become a very big conversation in the next couple of years, as interest rates also may change very dramatically. So these programs can be tailored about what's happening in the world around you as well. So, thank you.
And a question that I know is going to come up, so I'm going to go ahead and get it out here. Tim, you were there in 2006. How do you get these data if you're like you are now in Lewis County? You're new, and I'm assuming Lewis may have them, but let's say they didn't have those numbers. How are you going to get them?
That's the tricky part, right? As we come in, I came in 2006, I had none of this data. The previous highway superintendent took all the records with him when he left. And that's a fairly common thing, right? We don't have that history. So at very least, I'd recommend you start building it going forward. And that's why I say laying the groundwork, making sure you have really good records for the cost of those assets. And then you can actually just look at industry standards, talk to other municipalities around you. That's what I did, is I actually went to other municipalities and said, hey, do you have a truck that's 20 years old? Do you have any repair records on that? Because I didn't. And then I actually worked with a lot of the different vendors and said, can you give me some basic concepts of, what it's going to cost to repair this truck in year 3, 4, 5, and 6. And they say it's changed too, because when I started in 2006, that was pre-emission.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you, David. So that's a really good calculation right there. And I want to kind of walk you through the repair costs on that very same truck. So that 2006 plow truck, we did have some things that were not covered under warranty that failed. And we only owned it 7 years. But in that 7 years, we had a water pump go. We had a steering assist cylinder. We had a radiator repair. A stone flew through the radiator. We had one U-joint go bad. We had an air valve go bad. And we had a coolant tube rust out and an air valve solenoid. So the total of all those parts was $2,217. And I actually took the number of hours that it took to replace them, and I took our burden labor cost of $26 an hour, and I came up with an actual labor cost of what it would have cost to put those parts in. So our total repairs on that truck, now you'll notice I didn't put oil changes and things like that, because I look at that as standard maintenance that we'd be doing under any circumstance with any vehicle. So I just took the repair cost, and the repair costs were $3,179 divided by 7 years is $454 a year. So, like David said, how do you find, what a 20-year would look like? And I didn't have that data in 2006. So I'd gone to a neighboring town and I asked them, I said, if you keep a truck 20 years, what's it going to cost you? Well, it just happened that a neighboring town had a 1991 Ford L9000 that they had sold on Auctions International for $8,000 as scrap steel. And I asked them, and they put together a little sheet for me. They'd put 12 brake chambers on it, 10 front tires and 30 back tires and 3 backup alarms. But there were some big ones in here too. Dump boxes was replaced. There was 7 water pumps put on it. There's no dollar value there, but we could certainly put dollar values there, and it would certainly shock you. And that's the point, is most of these repairs that you go down and look at, tie rod ends, 3, didn't happen in the first half of that truck's life. It happened in the second half of that truck's life. And that's what really started to push the cost of ownership up. So let's do a little bit more on that actual example on that plow truck. We actually lease that plow truck, and that's a component that I want to talk about because it's kind of an important one. A lot of municipalities don't have the cash to go out and buy new trucks. And so you've got interest costs, the cost of borrowing money. So we actually paid $14,422 or $2,060 per year in interest that had to be added to the capital ownership of that truck. So that 2006 plow truck was $164,000 and was replaced in 2013 with a plow truck that cost $213,000. So in 7 years, that truck went from 164 to 213. Inflation was $48,000 on that truck, $48,756 or $6,965 per year. Now, a lot of people ask me, why would you borrow money? Why not just save it? And then when you have the money, go buy the truck. Then you're not paying this $2,000 a year. The truck is going up $7,000 a year in inflation. So when your interest rate is lower than your rate of inflation over here, it makes sense to lease the truck. If these numbers were flipped, If your cost of borrowing money was higher than the rate of inflation of that truck, it wouldn't. It would make sense to put that money in the bank and save it. And I actually got on the town board in my community way back. I'm going to give up my age a little bit, but way back in the late 80s, or well, it was the early 90s, I got elected to the town board, and interest rates were completely different. They were way different. We could actually put money into a CD and generate a fair amount of revenue from it. And trucks were very stable in their price. So we would have never looked at a leasing program at that point. That changed, and it may change again. So just something to be aware of is, what are interest rates right now? Municipalities are leasing and they're getting interest rates that are below 2%. So the cost of borrowing that money is very low, and yet the truck prices are increasing, and I keep saying trucks, but equipment prices are increasing fairly dramatically. So just something to kind of keep in place. So I kind of want to walk through the NPV life cycle costing with that particular vehicle so that you can see a real life example. The capital cost was $7,943 a year. The repair costs were $454 a year. The interest cost was $2,060 a year. And the total cost of operating that truck was $10,456 per year per truck. And that was calculated when we sold that truck 7 years later, so 2013. I can tell you that because of inflation, this number is just about doubled right now. So total cost of operation of a plow truck right now, a 10-wheeler, is going to be somewhere around $20,000 per year per truck. So it's important to kind of understand what that number is. And if you have 5 of those, you need to have 5 times 20,000 at least in your budget every year. Whether it's in your repair line or your acquisition line, you're going to spend that money one way or another. So it's important to educate your boards on what it truly costs to operate this stuff. Some of the benefits of a program, of actually managing the program, is you're hedging against inflation. Interest rates are lower than the rate of inflation on equipment, like I just showed you. So I think that's an important conversation to have. You want to leverage depreciation and sell that vehicle when it has a maximum residual value. I also think it's very important in this particular case, when we start talking about maximum residual value, as to how you spec the truck. So you know that you want to sell this truck for something other than scrap value. It's very important when you think about buying it that you're thinking about putting on certain specifications that make it more valuable to the next user as well. So a heavier axle, for example, or a heavier front end, so that there's still a valuable truck for that secondary user. It creates cost predictability. Once you get a program like this in place, you can budget a specific number, and it's every single year. So in the town of Cazenovia, we had every one of our plow trucks leased out. We had actually all of the equipment in the shop leased out and turning on a rotational basis. Plows were on a 7-year basis, loaders on a 2-year basis, pickup trucks on a 2-year basis, and we were doing that with $120,000 per year. Now, obviously, that number has to increase over time as the inflation goes up. So, but it creates a predictable number. And what a lot of municipalities do, and you'll look at it, if you look and start looking at town budgets, you'll see year 1, nothing. Year 2, nothing. Year 3, nothing. Then all of a sudden there's a large purchase of $300,000 or $400,000. Then there's nothing, and then $300,000 or $400,000. And the problem with that is it creates kind of this roller coaster of not only spending, but it can impact the taxes, because you don't have that kind of consistency that you want to try to build in for your taxpayers. So, and it's also very easy, and we've all seen it, right? So the board says every 4 years we'll let you buy a truck. And the problem is year 4 shows up and you're ready to buy a truck and COVID hits. So, and now it's year 5 and it's year 6, and year 6 is a really big number now because we missed out on the plan that we had. So getting this into a kind of a nice cost predictable number and running with that is very important. Helps predict and control cost of use and minimize repair costs. some of the benefits, once you get into a good program and you can start to rotate your equipment, and I cannot emphasize enough some of the um, outside or ancillary benefits that you realize. And one of them is newer equipment means less hours and repairs. So your employees are actually out working on the roads as opposed to being in the shop working on your equipment. So you've got some savings in labor that really are being thought of in all of this calculation. Is how much time is being spent in your shop fixing the truck. They could be out on the roads fixing potholes or trimming trees or doing the things that the taxpayers really want us to do to maintain our roads. So, equipment is a tool to help us get better roads. It's not the end game here. We have to kind of keep that in perspective. Better equipment means more efficient use of our labor. As you start to do this, you start to realize that as equipment improves over the years, manual labor becomes kind of a smaller component and you could get a lot more work done. So for example, in our community, we bought a roadside mower and for the first time bought a boom mower, and we're able to trim trees much faster than having a crew out there with 10 guys trimming a roadside.
Hey, Tim,
Yep.
that first bullet point there, when you were doing your repair calculations, do you include the cost of the mechanics in the shop?
I do not, and that's a hidden component, um, and something that we always have to look at. In my current role right now, a quarter of all of our employees are actually mechanics working on equipment, and it's there. And we've already had the conversation with the employees. It's not a surprise. What we'd really like to do is minimize that and get them out working on the roads. Um, Not eliminating any jobs, but redeploying them in things that improve our roads.
And spending more time on the maintenance of the vehicle rather than the repair of the vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So important stuff. But when you start to look at the new modern equipment, I mean, even the improvements in hydraulics in the last 10 years has been amazing. So you take something like a roadside mower and the ability to maintain the brush on the side of your roads compared to guys with chainsaws. And a lot of communities still do that because they don't have the right piece of equipment. Um, we added a skid steer, which at first we were like, why would we ever need a skid steer? And it improved our efficiencies dramatically. So there was some pieces that, once we saw them, they replaced physical labor. You need less equipment. When I started, we had two loaders, not because we needed two loaders, but if one loader broke down in the winter, we had no way to load trucks. What were we going to do? So we always had two of everything. We had two spare plow trucks. We had actually had three or four spare plow trucks, and we had two spare loaders. And as you get your equipment up to date, you need less of that. And it's very important concept here, and I can't emphasize it enough. If you start to go down this road, you have to get rid of your old equipment. People don't like to do that. They like to hang on to it because it doesn't owe us anything. We'll park it out back, and when we need it, it's there. Well, it's death by paper cut. If you have it, ultimately you fix it. You end up putting money into it, and it does cost you money. So it's imperative to not have excess equipment kicking around your place. If you're going to get onto a program like this, you want to keep your fleet as lean as possible and not have any spare equipment. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat pod. Maybe I've just bored the bored you guys or lost you here.
Well, it being the Q&A pod, they need to put them in, but yeah, I haven't seen any questions either. And folks are welcome to put in all the questions they want.
Okay.
Tell you what, I'm going to put a poll up because I'm just curious about something.
Okay.
We got several polls, but I think the most critical one of the ones we've got, let me find it here. Actually, we'll do two polls. We'll start with who they work for. I'm just curious. So there's a poll here. It's up. Tim and I can't vote. Who do you
Okay.
work for? Town, village, county, city, state, private sector? Let's see. About a little over half for the town. 60% actually, 10 of the folks. And then
Mhm.
we have a few from cities and villages and a couple from the state.
Perfect.
Okay, and then the other one, I'll share the results. What the heck? There's the first one.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the other one, and this one may even be more telling. How long have you worked with your highway department or DPW or whatever? Less than a year, 10 to 20, all the different ranges there. Let's just see what we got. Yeah, I got most people, almost. Okay, and we'll share those results as well. So most of them, Tim, actually have some experience. So, but we do
Yep.
have one person with less than a year and another person 1 to 5. So,
So a few new ones and a lot of veterans here.
well, again, if I can pick up one thing, I've still had a good day.
So, well, and absolutely, it's and I'm still, as I do these, it's still evolving, and I'm still learning stuff and adding more to it, and and some of this is you adapt your program to your legislative boards as well, because some things they're going to go, yep, that makes sense. Some things we're not so sure about that yet. So you've got to kind of customize this to your situation. So you need less equipment, you have less breakdowns, and you're more efficient, obviously, out there and safer. And one of the things that really kind of struck me as we started going through this, one was hearing. I can remember plowing in an old Mack plow truck, and it was so loud that when you got out of that truck at the end of the day, you couldn't hear. And the new trucks that we got into were like driving a car. You could sit there and talk. It was listen to the radio. That old Mac I first started plowing with, you couldn't listen to the radio because you couldn't hear it. And also you were less fatigued and less tired with some of the newer equipment. So there was a lot of safety factors. And honestly, whenever I spec equipment, I look at all of those things like backup cameras, things like that. Anything we can do to improve safety. Lighting packages, of course, with the LED lighting, it's gotten so much better and safer. So a few requirements. If you're going to really focus on a program like this, there's a few things that I've learned over the years that I think are important. You must buy the right equipment, and it requires constant research. And the example I always give everybody is, I don't know if anybody can remember, but you used to could buy a pickup truck off of state bid back when they had such a thing, and it was a stripped down basic pickup truck. It was a great deal, is so everybody thought. However, it had crank windows, it didn't have a differential rear end. I mean, this was a stripped down pickup truck, and they were fairly inexpensive, but you couldn't sell it. You couldn't resell it back to the public because nobody would want it. It was that basic. And so you can't do that. If you're going to buy a pickup truck and your intention is to keep it for 3 or 4 years and then sell it, you want to make sure that it's spec'd in a way that the average person would want to buy it, that it's got cruise control on it, and air conditioning, and an AM FM radio. So, and that's true too of a plow truck. Don't buy a plow truck that is so customized for your specific application that no other town or county would want to buy that truck when you're done with it. So you want to make sure that you understand. The other one is loaders, right? That's a real big one. When you're buying a loader, if your intention is to sell that loader at some point, you want to make sure that it's something that a contractor would want. And they don't want a loader with a pin on bucket. They want one with a quick connect coupler. They want one with hydraulics plumbed out there with a third valve. So talk to your vendors and find out what are their hottest selling items and start to incorporate them. And often you'll find those are things that actually um, improve your own efficiency as well. I see we have a question in the question and answer pod.
Yep,
Uh,
yep. Being a new superintendent of a village, there are no files to show the cost of repairs, what we talked about a couple of minutes ago. What is the best way to start to show the need to replace a plow truck based on age with lack of information?
yep. And that's the biggest challenge, right? Is I wouldn't focus too much, Pete, on going back in time because obviously you can't, but maybe lay out what the next 20 years look like. So starting today, if you could, what would be the way you'd want to see it go forward. And I'll show you a spreadsheet in a minute of how I did that. So instead of worrying about, where that truck is in this cycle, just start getting them all on a cycle and show them what the future looks like. And I'll show you a little bit of how I did that in a second.
Well, and again, you can talk to your neighbors and see what they're getting for times, knowing they're probably pretty similar. And
Mhm.
you can actually still do some of those similar calculations while you won't have repair cost. They'll have gone up over time. You can still do a net present value calculation. Even without those early numbers,
Mhm.
it'll still show you pretty quickly when you've reached that bottom point,
Yeah.
more than you think.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, because in the early years, there really isn't those huge costs. It's toward the end anyway. So,
Yeah, you don't have to worry about operational cost in this case, Pete, unless you see a major dramatic change in fuel mileage or a lot more oil use or something. Normally, we don't have to include those because they're annualized. We just look at the repair and the extra cost, not the everyday stuff.
yep. Must take care of the equipment. If you're trying to get maximum resale value, you want to have good equipment to sell when you're done. And it really requires a change in culture and in mindset with the employees. Is you want to provide them with the best equipment and you want them to take care of it and be proud of it. And I always encourage the employees to spend their time when they're, when they get back from plowing, if they're not needed out on the roads again to plow, make sure those trucks are clean and washed, and take care of them and be proud of them. And we want them to be proud of them, and we want to provide them with good equipment. So you really want to start to focus on that. If they're all dented up and smashed and haven't been greased and taken care of, then it's going to be a little bit harder to get your maximum resale value. You must eliminate excess equipment or right size your fleet. One of the first things that I do or always have done is I don't start with the equipment I have. I start with the equipment I'd like to have. So I pretend that I walked into a highway department and I have nothing, and I'm going to build it from the ground up. What would I buy? Not what I actually have here now, but what would I buy? How many trucks, how many pickup trucks, loader, and right size your fleet. Oftentimes, what you'll see is you have things in your fleet because you've had them in the past, but maybe it's not the right amount or the right piece or whatever. So you need to right size your fleet. That is not easy because there's always an argument for more. More loaders make life easier, more pickup trucks make life easier, but there's a limited amount of money we have. So you really want to have your fleet as efficient as possible. And by getting rid of the excess equipment you have, it helps bring in some cash to start to pay for the purchase of these new pieces. So,
The one challenge you have there, Tim, I've seen way too often, and that is we in municipal sector have to have some emergency equipment that you wouldn't have if it's just your summer operations. So, a county might own a snow go they only use once every 3 or 4 years. So up in Lewis County, you use it once every 2 or 3 hours. What?
well, but David, that's a really good point. Is when you look at your list of equipment, there are pieces that you use very little. Some of them you must own for that reason, emergency management purposes. Um, but there are some that it makes more sense to lease or to rent,
Yep,
right? So there's pieces
absolutely.
that you could, two or three pieces that you have in your fleet, that if you look at your actual hours of use, yeah, maybe I shouldn't own this. Maybe I should just rent this for 1 month every year.
Well,
Uh,
especially if you can rent it with an operator, that can actually be even more efficient because a specialized piece of equipment with a good operator can be a lot more effective than somebody who only uses, say, a crane 20 hours a year. They're
mhm.
not going to be very efficient with it versus renting that piece of equipment.
Now, a big difference in Lewis County, where I'm at now, a road grader is an absolutely essential piece. We use it a lot. Where I came from, all the roads were paved. So we had very little use for a road grader. We were lucky if we put 20 hours a year on a road grader. Nobody
Wow.
used it. It sat. We cut shoulders with it. That was it.
Yep. Yep.
So that's a piece where what we actually did in that case is we sold it to a neighboring town who had a lot of dirt roads and needed it. And whenever we needed our shoulders cut, they came over and worked with us, and and we did it as a shared service. So
What did you trade back with them?
we actually sold it for cash, but with the understanding that they would help us going forward to cut shoulders. So,
Okay, because sometimes people will trade services where one has a specialized piece of equipment.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, or and we're we used to work together very well. So the towns would all provide trucks. One would provide a grader. One would provide the sweeper and the roller. So there's some ways to look at the usage on those pieces. Another one that we talk about is a boom mower, right? A boom mower is a very expensive piece of equipment to own because it's a rough service piece and it gets beat up a lot. You're out in the trees banging it around. And so at what point do you want to own a boom mower or rent a boom mower? They're fairly expensive to rent. And I think the calculation is somewhere, if you use it less than 6 weeks, it makes sense to rent it. If you need it for more than 6 weeks, then maybe you ought to start to look at buying it. But there's a calculation that you can do for each of those pieces. So that's an important one to do as well. And I bet if most guys really look around their shops, they're going to find pieces that they use very infrequently. So it's important to kind of do that right sizing. And that really shows your legislative board that you're serious about this and you're really willing to put money back in to help them purchase the stuff that you need to get. So it helps pay for the upfront buy-in and let hours of use determine whether you need it or not. The biggest thing, and I know this is very hard, is I am not I didn't come up through the highway world. I came in from the private sector almost 20 years ago now. And I have no emotional attachment to any of this equipment. But I do know guys that do. I know lots of people who are emotionally attached to this, and you can't be. These are tools to be doing it, that we're using to get a job done. And you want to kind of look at it that way. You must stick with your plan. Requires and this is the hardest part, right? Is you can create great plans and your board can toss them out. 2 years later, there's a turnover in the elections and your plan goes away. Well, there's ways to kind of get around that too, or not get around it, but to make sure that you have buy-in. And that is, don't create a plan, but create the plan with your legislative board. So go to your town board and say, I'm thinking about creating a plan. I would like one member of the board to work with me on this plan and make it theirs. And then get as many of the board members involved in that plan as possible so that it's theirs, so that you have that political buy-in. And the beautiful thing about leasing is once you kind of get everything going and there's lease payments that are being made, it's being budgeted every single year. And it's not like they can go, oh, this year, we're not going to do that. We're going to go build a park. And then all of a sudden everything falls apart. So I'm kind of a big fan of leasing because it creates that discipline from the legislative side that they have to budget a certain amount of money every single year to keep the program going. If that, some pros and cons of the plan. I'll be honest. There's some things that are not good about doing a really aggressive plan, and that is it's not for everyone. It is a lot of work. When you start turning over 2 or 3 pieces of equipment a year in a small town or in a county where I'm at now, I'm going to be turning over a lot more than that. It's a lot of work. And you have to have buy-in from your bookkeeper or treasurer, from your clerk, from the board, from the attorney. And the highway superintendent has to be able to do that. And I know that many of you are working highway superintendents. You're out plowing in the summertime, you're out doing road work with the guys, and it's very hard to do that. I've had the luxury of being an administrative highway superintendent where I get to spend that time doing the research and doing that. But that's something that we all have to do, right? Is look at where is the most bang for the buck of your time as a highway superintendent. If you go out and you're on the actual paver, is that the best time spent for the town, or is it actually maybe in the office, getting a new piece of equipment or doing those things? And you guys know that. I mean, especially the guys that have been doing this a long time, it's a balance. And sometimes that balance is hard to maintain. So, but try to get people involved, but it is a lot of work. It does require constant vigilance because the world changes. Interest rates go up and down. Inflation happens. Things that at one time worked don't work anymore. Loaders used to be very easy to flip. However, more and more people started doing it. The market started to get saturated. It became a little bit harder to do. It was still doable, but it wasn't quite as lucrative. So, maybe that's when you decide you're going to hold a loader for 4 years instead of 2 because things changed. Having a plan doesn't mean that you're tied to it forever. It just means that given the current conditions that you're aware of, this is what you think is going to work. So you constantly kind of got to be researching and buying the right products and staying focused on what its resale values are. The relationship between the board and the highway department is critical. As most of you have kind of figured out, I've traveled all over New York State, been in lots of highway departments, seen ones that work really well, and I've seen ones that don't work so well. And the one common denominator is the relationship between the highway superintendent and his board. If that is a bad relationship, generally what you see is old equipment, an old garage, and maybe the people aren't getting the best bang for the buck. And when there's a good relationship, that tends to be the other direction. You got to remember that your legislative board are the people who have the purse. They're the ones with the checkbook. They write the checks. So that relationship is critical. The program should be a group effort. No one person should solely be responsible. I think, I always look at it like if I get this going and then I leave and it falls apart, then it's a failure on my part. So I need to have people in my organization who understand it, who buy into it, that can take it over when I'm gone. And I also need to have legislators and people on the other side and the administrative side who understand it and buy into it, because we want this to be something sustainable for the town. And you should have a long range plan that everyone works from. One of the things, and I will share with you, I was on the town board for many years, and the highway superintendent would come in every year and he'd say, I want a new truck. And my instant reaction was, I don't care if you want a new truck. You don't need a new truck. You just want a new truck because you want something new and shiny. And we've all had that experience when we've asked for something and we kind of get this reaction from our board. And I vowed never to do that. I never wanted to walk in and say, I want. What I always do is I come in with a plan and I say, we're on year 5 of our 20-year plan. And year 5 of the 20-year plan, the best value for the taxpayers is to do this. And now you're taking away the emotion of, you want a plow truck just because you want a new plow truck. You want something fancier than the town next door. That is not the case, but that is often the reaction when you walk in and just say, I need to buy a new plow truck, or I want to buy a new plow truck. You got to kind of explain it to them in the bigger context. And I always wanted to do that. And so stay on your long range plan and talk about your plan all the time. Don't walk in and say, I want a plow truck. Walk in and say, we're on year 3 of a plan, and this is what gets replaced in year 3 of that plan. So how to start this? It's all great in theory, right? But the rubber's got to meet the road somewhere. And how do we actually go about doing it? How do we get ourselves there? So the first thing I do is, and I'm going to show you a spreadsheet that I've created right here for Lewis County. I've been here about 7 months and I'm starting to put together a plan. And of course, that is not going to open up that way. Can everybody see my spreadsheet?
We can see it, and just for those who are interested, I put a link to that spreadsheet. I don't know if they'll be able to see it or not, Tim, but
yeah,
you'll get us a link, because I don't think that'll quite work, because that link's right on your computer.
Yeah, it's on my computer. So if anybody wants it, just email me and I'll be glad to send you. I've got several of them from different, times and eras. But this is one that I just put together. And what I did is,
if you've got one you really like, you email it to Amanda. We could email it to everybody.
Okay, great.
Why don't we do that?
Okay, thanks, Dave. So I've got a whole bunch of tabs down here at the bottom. Basically what I did is I usually start with the original spreadsheet that we keep for insurance purposes. We know every year we have to, We've got the VIN number, we've got the model and a little description of the truck and then the acquisition cost, and we keep that for our insurance records. I then take that and break it down and try to understand that a little bit more. And what I have here is I've ordered out all of our plow trucks, all of our loaders, any excavators, any haul trucks that we have, and then any pieces of heavy equipment that we have. And I have our pickup trucks separate because here in Lewis County, all of our pickup trucks are managed through enterprise rental. And they're basically doing the same exact thing that we just talked about, but they're managing it for the county. So I have a kind of a twofold program here. At the county level, I have all of the pickups being managed through enterprise rental, and then I have to worry about managing our heavy equipment, plow trucks, et cetera. So I kind of want to show you what I was up against here and how I'm going to start to try to fill that gap. So I was given $200,000 a year to replace equipment here in Lewis County. So the first thing I did is I took out all the pickup trucks and I just took all of the heavy equipment. I got rid of all the excess equipment, which was 18 pieces that we've surplused and gotten rid of. And that leaves 34 pieces of equipment left. And their total value of that equipment is $6,484,000. I'm given $200,000 a year. Well, simple math tells me that if I want to replace $6 million worth of equipment, $6.5 million worth of equipment every 10 years, I need to have $650,000. And if I want to do it every 20 years, I got to have $325,000. I can't even, at $200,000, I'm not going to touch that $6.5 million worth of equipment in 20 years. I'm way underfunded here. How am I possibly going to make this work, right? So I kind of looked at all of the equipment and I said, I know it's unreasonable to think that I'm going to be able to get this $200,000 and get my legislative board to bring it up to $650,000. There's just no way. So how am I going to try to close that gap? So what I did is I took pieces that I know can be rotated very quickly. So our plow trucks, our loaders, our excavators, and our haul trucks, those are all things we can buy. We can hold them for 6 years and sell them when they still have a fairly high residual value. And I started to map out what the lease payments for each of those pieces of equipment would look like. Then I took some pieces that have a much longer lifespan and don't really have great resale value. So for example, a road grader, a grade all, a shoulder machine, things like that. A shoulder machine is a 20-year piece of equipment. Doesn't have great resale value because other than municipalities who really uses one and not many municipalities actually use them. So I highlighted all those things in blue that we can hold on to for a long period of time. And what I'm looking at there is if I could use CHIPS money, a couple $100,000 a year. And so I broke the list down. I have $6.5 million. 4.2 million of that is rotatable. It's stuff that we can turn over and do a lease program on. So now I only need 420,000 roughly if I was going to do that every 10 years. And about 2.2 million in chips. So in 2.2 million in chips, and we know they have to last 10 years, so you can't replace it if you buy it with chips for at least 10 years. So this is pretty doable. If I put $220,000 a year of chips money toward those pieces in blue, then that's pretty manageable. And now it only leaves me this number here to manage with lease payments. David?
I'm just stepping in. We got a couple of minutes and see if anybody had any questions. I did have a comment, but I was waiting for you to get to a good break point. Keep going.
Okay. So now I'm down to 4.2 million and we've got residual values. So what we really need is about half of that. So what that does is it makes that 4.2 million very manageable with the $200,000 that we have. So I actually built in some little calculations here. If we take a haul truck or a plow truck, and I have an amortization schedule. Here's what we pay for it. Here's the interest rate, 5 years. What would my lease payments look like? And then I bring those back over to my plan and populate my actual lease payments right here. And then all of that calculates down this way. So that's what my total spend would be for that given year. So what we're going to see is an increase up to like 350,000, and then it's going to start to trend back off as I get more equity built up, and I can start to sell stuff that has good resale value, and it's going to start to trend back down. So that's kind of just trying to put together that plan. And see if we can make it all work. So I'm kind of in that stage where you guys would be at in starting this is, okay, here's the challenge I've been given. How do I break it down into small enough bites that we can start to make this happen? One of the things you'll see is that like in this particular year, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of equipment that I'm going to be flipping that year. That's a lot of work to buy and sell 5 pieces of equipment. So I've staggered everything out to try to keep the lease payments to a consistent number as close as I can throughout the lifespan of the equipment. So that's kind of a little spreadsheet of how I go about trying to tackle this.
The one thing I had a question for you, Tim, is all your items in blue that are the CHIPS items.
Mhm.
That does mean, of course, you have that $200,000 less being put back into the roadway. So
Absolutely.
you have to balance that. And some of those items you might even think about eventually putting into your cycle.
Yes, absolutely. And ideally, and I have to be honest with you, David, I am not a fan of using CHIPS money to buy equipment. I think it's the worst thing in the world to do. We need that money to go into our roads. But given
short term, I understand. Yeah, you're trying to
short
get to
term,
a longer term legacy. Yep.
yep.
Two questions.
Once we start to get equity, and I can move more and more of those pieces out of the chips. You have to, like I said, sometimes our programs deal with our political realities too. And I know I'm not going to come in and they've always budgeted 200,000, and I'm going to try to get it to 6. That's a big lift. Now, what I can do is next year, if I can reduce our repair costs by 100,000, I can get 200 to 300 just by reducing our repair costs and putting it over into purchased capital equipment.
Right.
So that's kind of what you're doing, right? You're showing them you want to bring down your repair costs and you want to move that money over into your capital equipment fund and start to get this program running.
Pete wants to know are there formulas in the spreadsheet so they can plug in their own equipment, or how's that work?
Yes, I mean you could take out these things, but I don't have it set up that way where you could just plug in kind of your own thing and it would calculate like that.
Well, you could do at least your individual piece of equipment, like click on your one that you had for the haul truck.
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
one you could do, and you could bring those over.
Yeah,
And the cyclic spreadsheet that I put in earlier, you can put on your own equipment. It was designed for that purpose. So to get started.
Yep. And if you took a plow truck right here, so for example, a $270,000 plow truck, 3.25% interest, 5-year period, you're going to make one payment a year. It's going to be 26,806. Or I'm sorry, your payments are going to be $60,000 a year for a 5-year lease on a plow truck. Now, what if we put 50% down on that 270? So we're actually going to, once we get equity rolling in here, and we're actually only going to finance half of that. What does that look like? And what that looks like, not 1 million, 10.
Whoops. You need to control Z a couple of times there, Mr. Tim.
Oh boy, really.
I like control Z. It's my favorite keystroke.
That's the oops.
That's the oops keystroke. Yep. There you go. Now you can put your right number in.
Yep. There we go. 135, 1, 2, 3 zeros, and 29,000. So your lease payment's literally cut in half. And that's the whole point is, when we start to look at this, is equity, is getting a piece with residual value to keep your leases down and keep everything rolling. So.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. We're running a little over, but if anybody had one last question, otherwise we'll let everybody go. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, but be glad to take them. And why don't you show your last slide there, Tim, because it has your email address on it.
Yes, timhunt@county.ny.org. If you send me an email, I'd be glad to send you anything I've got. I got lots of spreadsheets. Anybody wants to,
.gov, Tim, .gov.
.gov, yes, thank you.
Okay.
ny.gov. And if you want, send me an email. I'll shoot you back my contact information. I'm always glad to chat with somebody on the phone if they want help on a specific project as well.
And vice versa, you can also contact us at our website and be glad to help there. And you're doing another webinar on budgeting in July.
Correct.
And while some people go, July seems like early for the budget, a lot of budgets are actually due in July. So.
And honestly, as you know, Dave, when it comes to budgeting, starting right now is not too early.
No, not at all. Well, thanks again, Tim, for joining us today, and thanks for everybody who was online. If you want to sign up for our other webinars, please feel free to do so, either going to our website or clicking on the link that Adam just threw into the chat pod. And have everybody should have a great day.
Great. Thank you all.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.